My name is Brittany Freeman, and I chose the book The Great Chicago Fire and the Myth of Mrs. O'Leary's Cow. The book was written by Richard F. Bales. He did extensive research using documents that were saved from the fire, handwritten transcripts, over 50 interviews, and other primary source information. Mr. Bales also created a scale drawing that reconstructed the O'Leary neighborhood. Around 9 p.m. on Sunday, October 8, 1871, a fire started in a barn in the alley behind 137 Decauvin Street in Chicago. The Chicago Fire of 1871, also called the Great Chicago Fire of the City. The Great Chicago Fire killed 300 people, left some 100,000 homeless, and destroyed 200 million worth of property. In October 1871, dry weather and an abundance of wooden buildings, streets, and sidewalks made Chicago vulnerable to fire. The Great Chicago Fire began in or around a barn located on the property of Patrick and Catherine O'Leary. Legend holds that the blaze started when the family's cow knocked over a lighted lantern. However, Catherine O'Leary denied this charge. There is no animal that is more infamous than a cow belonging to Patrick and Catherine O'Leary that was accused of starting what Fire Marshal Robert A. Williams called a hurricane of fire and cinders. Neighbors and newspaper reporters quickly placed the blame on the O'Learys and their cow. In the early hours of October 9th, newspapers first reported that the blaze started when the cow, as Catherine milked it, kicked over a kerosene lantern. After the fire was put out, the story evolved and more blame fell on the O'Learys. The cow appeared to be blameless, and several reporters came forward decades after the fire to admit the story of the cow kicking the lantern was a fabrication, or at least came from unreliable sources. Reporter Michael Ahern, who was working for the Chicago Republican at the time of the fire, admitted in a 1921 column in the Chicago Tribune that he and two colleagues made the cow story up to add some color to their copy. After that, another reporter, John Kelly, wrote to the O'Leary's grandson saying that he was the one that wrote the first instance of the cow story under Ahern's byline, since his colleague's drinking habit prevented him from writing and filing the story. Meanwhile, the Chicago Daily Journal explained that on the night of the fire, one of the reporters had gone to the O'Leary's neighborhood and heard the cow story from neighbors there, and the paper ran with it without looking into it further. Recollections of the fire, published by one of the O'Leary's neighbors, say that the story started with some neighborhood kids who hadn't been in the barn or near it, but spent the night telling anyone who would listen about a cow kicking a lantern anyway. Despite the board's conclusions, or lack thereof, the damage to Catherine O'Leary and her cow were done. Mrs. O'Leary lived out the rest of her life as virtual recluse, reporting only leaving her home to attend Mass. Every October, reporters came to her looking for a quote for the fire anniversary stories, and she shooed them away. She died in 1895. Her obituary and death certificate listed the cause of acute pneumonia, but neighbors and friends said the real cause was a broken heart from unfounded blame she received. A century after her death, Catherine and her cow were cleared of any wrongdoing, and another suspect was discovered. Bales found that the O'Leary's barn was full of animals, some of them belonging to neighbors, and some used for Catherine's milk business. There were 5 cows, a calf, and a horse. Had Catherine been in the barn when the fire broke out, it seems unlikely that she would have run back into her home and allowed her property to literally go up in smoke. Bales wrote, instead, she would have cried for help and attempted to extinguish what was then just a minor barn fire and save the building and its contents. That November, the Board of Police and Fire Commissioners started an investigation into the fire. Mrs. O'Leary testified that she never milked the cows in the evening and that she was asleep in bed when the fire started, having gone to bed early, complaining of a sore foot. Daniel Pegleg Sullivan, a neighbor who was the first person to raise the alarm about the fire, also testified and confirmed Catherine's alibi. After 2 months, the board members couldn't say much about the origin of the fire except that it started in the barn, whether it originated from a spark blown from a chimney on that windy night or was set on fire. They said, "We are unable to determine." The most significant thing Bales found in his research was reason to suspect that the fire was started by Pegleg Sullivan, the man who first noticed it. When he testified before the investigative board, Sullivan said he visited the O'Leary's house around 8 p.m. and found Catherine in bed and Patrick ready to join her. He headed home. but then kept going past his house and stopped in front of a neighbor's house to smoke a pipe. He looked up and saw fire coming from the O'Leary's barn and ran into it to try to extinguish the flames and free the animals before seeking help. After mapping out the various homes and properties, Bales doubts Sullivan's version and events. First, the buildings were arranged in such a way that from where he stood to smoke his pipe, Sullivan would not have been able to see the barn because another home would have blocked his view. Sullivan had a wooden leg and couldn't move very fast, yet he claimed that he ran from his smoking spot to the barn, a distance about half the length of a football field, and escaped the barn before the fire consumed it and ran to alert the O'Learys and the authorities. Given his condition, the distances involved, and the speed which the fire spread, Bales argues Sullivan could not have done what he claimed without being injured by the fire. There is also the matter of why Sullivan walked past his own house to smoke his pipe in front of his neighbor's house. The McLaughlins were having a party that night and would have been able to see him if he was standing in front of his own house. Bales argues that Sullivan was in or around the barn that night. His mother kept one of her cows there and he may have gone to feed it, and by accident with a careless flick of a match or stray ember from his pipe or bumping a lantern started the fire. In 1997, convinced by Bales' argument and evidence, the Chicago City Council passed an ordinance exonerating Mrs. O'Leary and her cow. The disaster prompted an outbreak of looting and lawlessness. Companies of soldiers were summoned to Chicago and martial law was declared on October the 11th. Martial law was lifted several weeks later. Despite the fire's devastation, much of Chicago's physical infrastructure, including its transportation systems, remained intact. Reconstruction efforts began quickly and spurred great economic development and population growth, as architects laid the foundation for a modern city featuring the world's first skyscrapers. At the time of the fire, Chicago's population was approximately 324,000. Within 9 years, there were some 500,000 Chicagoans. By 1890, the city was a major economic and transportation hub with an estimated population of more than 1 million. Today, the Chicago Fire Department Training Academy is located on the site of the O'Leary's property where the Great Fire started. In 1997, the Chicago City Council passed a resolution exonerating Catherine O'Leary. Richard F. Bales is the Assistant Regional Counsel with the Chicago Title Insurance Company. He was able to finally clear Mrs. O'Leary's name of any wrongdoing in 1997 due to his research. To this day, his company maintains the only set of land records that survived the Great Fire of 1871. This page contains all of my sources. This page contains all of my sources for my pictures. Side note at the bottom states some pictures have the resource at the bottom of the picture. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.